Good morning, everyone. Thank you for that. I'm Audrey Bilger, president of Reed College, and I'm delighted to welcome you to this very special event. Welcome, class of 2026, transfer students, family, friends, faculty, staff, and continuing students. We are all here today to mark the beginning of a new school year and to commemorate the inclusion of our newest Reedies into the ongoing story of this remarkable school. I've spent the majority of my life on college campuses. I just realized this week that I'm now 30 years out from when I earned my PhD and took my first job as a professor, and more than 40 years out from when I began my undergraduate journey. Across that distance, every fall semester, I'm thrilled and humbled by the fresh ideas and perspectives that entering classes and students bring. That's why I've loved being a teacher, and that is why I'm honored to be Reed's president. A college is always in a state of becoming, and for those of us who believe in a growth mindset, so are we. As a first-generation college student at a large state university, I worried that I was somehow behind, that other students had things figured out that I didn't know about, and that there was some code that I just couldn't crack. I thought I was the only one. Even though this is a small community, some of you might feel that way too. Please know that you belong here and that Reed needs you. We need to hear your voice and listen to your point of view. You are unique and you matter. What you contribute will shape Reed's future. During this week of orientation, as you seek to get your bearings and find your balance, think about that place on the map with the three most important of all words. You are here. You are here. In the coming weeks, months, and years, you will find your favorite spot to settle down with a book, a meal you look forward to at Commons. You will study with faculty members who will supercharge your dreams. You will make friends and discover common interests. You will agree and disagree and engage in discussions where you will lose track of time. Look around now and take note of how you feel. This is your college now. I mean that not in some yours versus mine or yours versus some past generations. Because of your presence, Reed is a different place than it was prior to your arrival. I cannot predict what is to come, but this I know for sure. Being here will change your life, and you will bring about changes while you're here at Reed and beyond. So, welcome to our shared story. I'm excited for us to write this next chapter together. Thank you.
Good morning. My name is Miljan Trulov. I'm the Vice President and Dean of Admission and Financial Aid. And yesterday was a big day for many of us parents and guardians. You all were dropping your students off at college, and I was dropping my son off at preschool. And by the look of it, you all handled it much better than I did. I couldn't help but reflect on many of the similarities between our days, of which there are very few. But as caretakers, one thing we both understood was that this was an important day for our student. And while it was difficult to walk away, we had a sense that it was for the best, that they needed to grow. And in order to do that, they had to be on their own. It's important for them to play with others, to work with others, to build relationships that will last beyond our own relationship with our students. We handed them over to teachers and staff who we trust are committed to their development, committed to their well-being, and we know that we didn't come by this decision lightly. Every day I pick up my son, he says, "Dad, do you have a snack in the car?" It's a simple routine we go through every day. We repeat it like clockwork, and I know in 2 years when he's off to elementary school, I'm gonna miss it, and I dread the day it ends. You're dropping your students off with us, and I'm certain you've lived your own special traditions. Those moments where you ask the same question at dinner. The morning exercise of getting your student out of bed. We might hate it now, but we'll miss it soon. Their sense of humor and your own terrible sense of humor has filled the house with laughter and tears. I spoke with one of you yesterday, and you told me you were heading to your car to bawl your eyes out because you'd missed your students so much. I've had my son with me for 3 years. I can only imagine how challenging it is for you to walk away. And I can't tell you how much I appreciate that you trust us enough to do so. You probably worry less about pull-ups and sleep diapers. We know there'll be accidents and teachers will clean it up. That's actually where the analogy falls apart. Here is the point. Things will not always go to plan, but I'm going to come back to that. 399 first-year students and 24 transfer students enroll at Reed this fall. Let's give them a hand. In this Reed's most selective class, the name that you'll hear most often, and I was generous because your spellings are so unique. 7 of you go by Sophia, Sophie, or Sophia. And then tied for second place, 5 names, a version of Alexander, Alexandra, Alessandra, and Alexandra. Catherine, Catherine, and Catherine. Emily, Emily, and Emily. Henry. That's it. Isabel, Isabella, and Isabel. So, Sophie's, let's hear you cheer. Raise your hand. Let's give them a hand. If you think you hear your name walking down the hallway, you're probably dead. Close place right after that, Amelia, Anna, Aaron, Ella, Natalie, Nathan, and Samuel. There are 2 high schools that donated 4 students to our incoming class. Liberal Arts and Science Academy High School in Austin, Texas. Where are you at? All right. Pacific Collegiate School in Santa Cruz, California. Both sending 4 students from their senior class to Reed. Really interesting. Your top majors are different than what they've been for as long as I've been here. Most of you are interested in psychology and neuroscience. Second most popular major is undecided. Yeah. You'll figure it out. English, environmental studies, math, philosophy, and history lit. All right? You represent 44 states. Most of you hail from California, but after that, Washington, and surprising third, Texas, from which we have 24 students. Hey, Texas. After that, Oregon, Colorado, New York, Illinois. You can cheer. Massachusetts, Hawaii, and Arizona. Collectively, we named 15 countries our home of citizenship, including Australia, Bangladesh, Canada, China, Ethiopia, France, Georgia, India, Italy, Mexico, Nepal, South Korea, Spain, the United States, and Vietnam. So that's just a little bit in terms of numbers. I'm going to give you a little detail about a few of your classmates. One of you is the first place winner in the 2020 and 2021 Costumes Makeup category in Drama Teachers Association of Southern California. We have a captain of the swim team, captain of the tennis team, many captains litter this group. One of you is classically trained in Russian ballet, is a classically trained Russian ballet soloist, and you've performed in 23 productions. One of you co-founded a machine learning accessible startup and received $1.5 million in funding. One of you is the co-founder of Learnotopia Social Inc., a nonprofit that helps students living in shelters. One of you is the co-founder and executive director of a legally constituted association for transgender children. One of you is the first person under 18 to change their legal name through an administrative process rather than trial. One of you conducted mental research for diagnosed cystic fibrosis patients and introduced a new medicine after you collected and reported important and valuable data. One of you created an event, Serial Mornings, to create a welcoming atmosphere in class, and you started it at 7 a.m. Welcome to the West Coast. One of you designed a pulley system with your dad to safely deliver candy, directed the music video on Van Gogh Dao, and contributed to stop-motion animation. One of you competes at the highest level of Highland dance, the 2020 military tattoo dance team, and is a Western U.S. champion and Northern U.S. champion. One of you founded the anti-racism committee at school, and one of you survived dire circumstances, 3 cancer diagnoses. And what you say is that you go out of your way to be kind to others. You're more than just the numbers. You are incredible. Students, up to this point, you've heard a lot about Reed, and now I'll warn you, now that it's too late, Reed is only nearly perfect. The campus is divided by a canyon, a body of water, 28 acres right through the middle, and we have bridges to cross that canyon. There are a lot of bikes here. If you're used to having the bike lane all to yourself, that has now changed in Portland, and it's hilly. Other surprises, occasionally we burn your homework right outside the library. And while sanctioned, you're not allowed to do it until it's been reviewed by a panel. And while we may not be perfect in some other ways, I want to remind you of something I've said time and time again. You are not coming to read for one thing, for one instance, or one person. You are not coming to read just for the first year experience, for the move-in day, for the first college dance, or the first all-nighter. Just the first does not a college experience make. I asked you to think about the person you would become after 4 years at Reed. If that version of you was someone you were excited about, this was probably the place for you, because you imagined a wonderful 4-year experience. So Reedies, why things might not go according to plan, remember this: every one of you earned your admission to Reed. Every one of you earned your admission to Reed. Reedies, when things don't go perfectly as planned, every one of us, the faculty, the staff, your fellow students, are here to support you. We are all here to support you. Reedies and parents, when things don't go perfectly, remember, you chose Reed because you trusted and envisioned a cumulative experience that will lead you to greater success in life. We know that, and we are committed to helping you fulfill your dreams. Students, like those bridges on campus, you are the ones that will connect us to our better halves. And while we are only nearly perfect, we're closer to perfect because of you. Welcome to Reed, Reedies.
Hi, everyone. My name is Safi. I use she, her pronouns, and I am your student body president for this upcoming semester. Thank you. But that is hardly the most important thing I do on this campus. I also work in the dance department. I work as a mentor in our peer mentoring program. I serve on our campus's honor council, and I do a lot of planning for our Black Student Union alongside Karana. And believe it or not, I even spent last summer working as a tour guide in the admissions office. Maybe at the end of this speech you can tell me how believable that is, but it's true. It is largely because of this that I am in no shortage of Reed trivia. I could stand here and tell you why they planted those trees along this lawn, or explain the crests on Old Dorm Block over there, which was built in 1912, by the way. I could tell you about all the nooks and crannies of our 28-acre nature canyon, or I could tell you that our performing arts building is LEED certified. And yes, I can tell you what that stands for. And yet, this would not be the same as telling you about Reed. I've only been here for 2 years, but it doesn't take long to realize it is not our curriculum or our great lawn or our red brick buildings that make up Reed. These little additives, while they may contribute to the aesthetically unique nature of our campus, are merely what makes this place a school. It is our students that make Reed a home. College, as many would say, is a breeding ground for change. It's tasked with molding the impressionable young minds of its inhabitants. Reed, however, does not necessarily shape us. In fact, quite the opposite. We shape Reed. This is not to say that you're not going to change while you're here, because believe me, you will. Rather, I found that this place is nothing if not a reflection of the selfless, daring, and open-minded individuals that it hosts. I can tell you that on this campus, which is only as good as its students, you will meet people who inspire you, who challenge you, who encourage you, and who will love you. Should you be so lucky to find friends half as good as mine, you might find yourself saying much of the same things. Now, I could stand here and tell you about all the people I've met and the classes I've taken and the memories I've made, but that would not necessarily be the whole truth. Reed is not always going to be roses, and when you look like me, it can be difficult to feel motivated. I don't take it lightly that I, one of a mere handful of Black students in my year, am standing here asking you to feel inspired and excited about entering our predominantly white campus. But two truths can exist at once. Yes, Reed is not perfect. Yes, it is not always easy. And yes, if you are without visible proximity to whiteness, sometimes it might feel downright impossible to be here. And yet at Reed, you still have a real chance here to carve a space uniquely your own, to be part of a community where students advocate for one another with fortitude and support each other devotedly. I remind us all of the racial demographics of our campus, not only to acknowledge the reality for my fellow Black students or even our students of color, but to let it be known by everyone that it is imperative you engage constructively with our community. For those of you who, much like myself, are underrepresented, without white privilege, and cannot hide behind ambiguity, you belong here, even if at times it might feel like the opposite. And you are not alone. There will be individuals of similar backgrounds or experiences here to support you when you need it. For those of you who are not outnumbered and who fit the racial model upon which this institution was designed, I only ask you to think critically about the privileges that come with you as you settle in, and to listen to your peers with an open mind. And for all of us, regardless of our racial and ethnic backgrounds or our genders and sexualities, I ask that we reflect upon ourselves with a critical lens. For privilege is not always going to be about how you may see yourself, but how the world around us sees you. When prospective students think about college with excitement, I know it's often said that the grass is always greener on the other side. But when it really comes down to it, trust me when I say the grass is greener where you water it. What I'm trying to say here is our community is not going to find you. You have to find it yourself. And luckily, at Reed, you can find it in most places you might look. I only ask that as you join us, and as you grow yourself a garden on our campus, you let yourselves be guided by nothing if not kindness and compassion. Uplift one another, care for one another, and remember, you're not just entering a campus, you're joining a community. Welcome.
Good morning. I'm Kathy Olson, the Dean of the Faculty and Professor of Psychology here at Reed, and I have the great honor and pleasure to introduce our speaker, Mark Burford, the R.P. Wallenberg Professor of Music. Mark has taught at Reed for 15 years, joining Reed's faculty in 2007. He received his BA in music with an emphasis in music theory from the University of California, Santa Barbara, before earning his master's and PhD in historical musicology from Columbia University. He's returning to Reed this fall from being on sabbatical this last year. On sabbatical, he was the Sheila Biddle Ford Foundation Fellow at Harvard's Hutchins Center for African and African American Research. Mark shared with me a little about his path to becoming a music historian. He noted, quote, "I guess you can say that as a kid I wanted to be an orchestral conductor. But as a first-gen college student who had no idea what academia was, a college professor wrote in comments on a music history paper that I should consider musicology, which I'd never heard of before. When I found out it involved listening to and writing about music, I thought I'd give grad school a shot. And lucky for us, he did." In addition to Mark's anecdote, I looked a little bit around on the internet, and I looked at an old Daily Nexus newspaper from UC Santa Barbara, which featured a 1989 interview with Mark, lacrosse defender Mark Burford, who said, they asked him what he wanted to do after college. He said, "I'd like to do something in a musical field. I've always been involved in music. And I'd like to do something maybe in administration." So we'll come back to that. Later on, Mark's outstanding field achievements in lacrosse were honored. He became recognized as a member of the UCSB Men's Lacrosse Hall of Fame. So today I'm going to focus more on his achievements within music and within Reed, rather than on the lacrosse field, but wanted to acknowledge kind of his beginnings back in college. Recent achievement, most notably this summer, Mark received the Dent Medal. That literally is a medal. I haven't seen this medal, but every year it's awarded by the Royal Musical Association to honor a mid-career faculty member for their outstanding contributions to musicology. The Royal Musical Association notes, in describing Mark, "His research is distinctive and broad-reaching in its implications for the field, melding music's sonic aspects and political valence, linking histories of music to the histories of complex ideas, and writing in a highly engaging manner." Mark's research and teaching focuses on late 18th and 19th century Austro-German concert music and 20th century popular music in the United States, with a particular focus on African American music after World War II. His research initially focused on Brahms, but he has turned in the last decade to Black popular music studies. The Royal Musical Association notes, "He has opened up a new field, offering Black objects of study as legitimate and productive focus for musicology inquiry." This recent work began in 2012 in a publication in the Journal of the American Musicological Society. He wrote an article called "Sam Cooke as Pop Album Artist, a Reinvention in 3 Songs." And he received the Society for American Music's 2012 Irving Lowen's Award for this outstanding article on American music. In 2019, he published his monograph, Mahalia Jackson and the Black Gospel Field, with Oxford Press. The book received, and I'll list a whole host of awards, the Oda Otto Kinkelde Award from the American Musicological Society for the Outstanding Book of Musicology by a Senior Scholar, the Society's highest honor. The Woody Guthrie Award for the Most Outstanding Book on Popular Music from the U.S. branch of the International Association for the Study of Popular Music. The award for Excellent for the Best History Book in the category of Historical Research in Blues, Soul, Gospel, and R&B from the Association for Recorded Sound Collections, and was selected as a Choice Outstanding Academic title. The next year, he edited the Mahalia Jackson Reader. The Royal Musical Association, in describing his work, describes its importance in this way. It's notable for the attention paid to the interaction of sonic detail with socially attributed meanings, including the racialized forces that shaped and were shaped by the performances of Black performers, and for its theoretical breadth and rigor. He also considers sounding music from the perspective of multiple listeners, and so musical meaning is understood as collectively produced and determined. His wider contributions to musicology is a compassionate demonstration of how we might productively rethink the rationalizations of the discipline's past. I'm going to end by saying, in addition to the profound impact that Mark has had on the field of musicology, he's profoundly impacted the music department here at Reed and also the broader Reed community. He's a sought-after instructor teaching courses this year in music history, women in 60s popular music, Black freedom struggle, and Africa and Black music. He's a college leader. And his idea back in college in 1989 that he wanted to maybe do something in administration, he's been our interim dean for institutional diversity in recent years and is currently serving on the Committee for Advancement and Tenure, and also stepped up to be the secretary of it even to help administer that committee in recent weeks. I hope you'll join me in welcoming our speaker, Mark Burford.
Well, thank you very much for that very generous introduction, Kathy, and resourceful, I must say. First introduction that involves my lacrosse past, which is a breakthrough, I suppose. It really is a privilege and a pleasure to be able to speak to the class of 2026 today in the company of their family and friends and my faculty and staff colleagues. I think above all because at a time when we continue to swim upstream in the face of a pandemic that seems to linger without end, it does feel good to set aside a day to mark a conspicuous and important beginning, especially in person. So as Dean Olson mentioned, I'm a music historian, and being part of a music department puts me in the rare circumstance of sharing the classroom with students, virtually all of whom are already experts in some form or another in the subject I teach, whether their area of connoisseurship is hip-hop or K-pop, noise music or chamber music, indie rock or Armenian folk, which means I learn from my students constantly. And as a musicologist, which is just a science-y sounding name for a music historian, I also feel fortunate that Reed has allowed me the freedom and the support to pursue the breadth of my interests as a teacher-scholar, which has enabled me to offer a diverse array of courses and dig into a range of research topics. I arrived at Reed in 2007, having written a dissertation on the early career of German composer Johannes Brahms in 19th century historicism. And in recent years, my main focus has been African American gospel music, particularly the life and career of the woman some call the queen of the gospel singers, Mahalia Jackson. My current project, which I broke ground on during my sabbatical last year, orbits a figure that nearly all first-year students will be learning much more about and discussing in Humanities 110, the African-American intellectual and activist W.E.B. Du Bois. And for the benefit of those who don't know about or are only vaguely familiar with him, here's a very quick speed date with Du Bois in preparation for your more committed relationship in the spring, though you will, of course, see other people. William Edward Burghardt Du Bois was born in 1868 in western Massachusetts and died in Accra, Ghana in 1963 and that lifespan alone is worth pausing to register. The U.S. historian in me would point out that Du Bois was born just 5 years after the abolition of slavery in the United States and died the night before Martin Luther King Jr.'s I Have a Dream speech at the March on Washington. The music historian in me would observe that Du Bois was born the year that Richard Wagner's opera Die Meistersinger and Brahms's German Requiem premiered, and died the year that Marvin Gaye's Pride and Joy and the Beach Boys' Surfin' USA were released. If only he'd been a record collector. But I guess he was busy. Du Bois's near century of life was truly amazing. It included a bachelor's degree from the HBCU Fisk University, graduate work in Berlin in the 1890s, a PhD from Harvard in 1895, the first by an African American, an influential organizing role in the Pan-Africanist movement, authorship of numerous books, including The Philadelphia Negro, Black Reconstruction in America, The Souls of Black Folk, and The Dark Princess, works of sociology, history, political philosophy, and fiction, respectively, and in 1909, co-founding the civil rights organization, the National Association for the Advancement of Colored People, perhaps better known as the NAACP. This is where my own research comes in. Du Bois left his faculty position at Atlanta University to become founding editor of the new NAACP magazine called The Crisis, a record of the darker races, which he oversaw from 1910 until 1934. My current project is the coverage of music in The Crisis during the Du Bois's 23-year editorship, which has turned out to be both voluminous and fascinating. But it's only indicative of how music, as sound and as embodied activity, was a continuous preoccupation for Du Bois as a thinker and writer, as you'll learn about in Hume 110 when you read his chapter from the Souls of Black Folk on African American spirituals, which he called sorrow songs. Fairly or unfairly, Du Bois is often cast as a cultural elitist, and you would be more likely to spot him in the concert hall than at a juke joint. But the pages of The Crisis, which convened a polyphony of voices, even if Du Bois firmly held the baton, have revealed a much more complicated matrix of music in Black America in the decades between the rise of ragtime around the turn of the century and the early years of the New Negro Renaissance in the 1920s, situating concert, popular, and folk music in proximity to a parade of issues, ranging from social work to the promotion of Black composers, from higher education to the boom and the circulation of phonograph recordings, from the desegregation of entertainment venues to the building of autonomous African American institutions, from aesthetic idealism to Black capitalist endeavor. These revelations have pushed me to rethink some of my previous assumptions about the historiography and even the substance of early 20th century African American music. Du Bois himself was unmusical, but he returned repeatedly and in various ways to the topic of music and musicians and their implications for the lives, welfare, and futures of Black people in the United States. How we might characterize and appraise the stakes of the making, hearing, and materiality of music suggested by Du Bois's intellectual output and political activism, and more basically, what goals he and his contemporaries believed music and Black music making might help to achieve, are questions that I hope to lead to some conclusions in my research and in my teaching through conversation with my students. One of the factors that convinced Du Bois to leave academia and become a public intellectual was the notoriously barbaric lynching in 1899 of a Black laborer in Georgia named Sam Hose, just 40 miles from where Professor Du Bois was living and teaching at the time. In oral history recorded in 1961, the 93-year-old Du Bois remembered his visceral and career-altering response to seeing pieces of Hose's dismembered body displayed in the window of a butcher shop in downtown Atlanta. As he told his interviewer, "I made up my mind that knowledge wasn't enough, that even if people were ignorant of essential matters which they had to know, they wouldn't correct their actions without more realization of just what the difficulties were. They had not only to know, but they had to act. And so I changed from studying the Negro problem to propaganda, to letting people know just what the Negro problem meant." When I encountered this recollection, I was interested in the nexus of knowledge, comprehension, interpretation, and action laid out by Du Bois. But I was even more struck by his use of the word propaganda to characterize his conscious turn to activism, particularly in conjunction with his decision to become editor of The Crisis. Du Bois's frank explanation of his change in tactics still feels provocative. As he wrote in his 1940 autobiography, less as a confession than as a statement of vocation, my career as a scientist was to be swallowed up in my role as master of propaganda. Part of the jolt of incongruity that comes, for me at least, when taking stock of the erudite and principled Du Bois as a devout propagandist, reflects the way we commonly conceptualize and identify propaganda, which many and perhaps most of us might associate with totalitarian regimes, politically motivated misinformation campaigns, and other malevolent forms of persuasion. Viewed in the context of intellectual history, this is actually a fairly recent pejorative turn, dating to the First World War and more decisively to the Cold War, during which propaganda was a ready accusation and at the same time was relentlessly deployed by both the United States and the Soviet Union on their own citizens. Ever since, which means for the entire lifetime of most of the people in this tent, propaganda has been generally understood, if not firmly accepted, as the deceptive communication that each side of a political debate accuses the other side of stooping to. In discourse of all kinds, pointing out that another person's words are just propaganda, as opposed to one's own truth, is a dependable and omnipresent checkmate. Which made it eye-opening to discover how differently Du Bois thought about this concept, which he seemed to understand as a conditional means, not an intrinsically nefarious end. To be sure, Du Bois readily recognized the negative work of propaganda, which at its core we might define as a goal-directed mode of persuasion. In the final chapter of his 1935 book, Black Reconstruction, titled The Propaganda of History, Du Bois surveyed how previous historical writing on the period following the Civil War, through racist and bad faith narratives about the activist federal government and black people themselves, circulated ideas that precipitated lasting adverse outcomes for African Americans. A few years later, in a way that feels painfully resonant with the historical moment we're living in now, Du Bois expressed regret that, quote, "We've raised propaganda to a capital P and elaborated an art, almost a science, of how one may make the world believe what is not true, provided the untruth is widely wished-for thing," end quote. But it's also noteworthy how often Du Bois endorsed the possibility of propaganda working in other directions. In a 1924 issue of The Crisis, for instance, a photo caption identified anti-lynching picket signs as NAACP propaganda. In a review that same year, Du Bois praised an exhibit in Philadelphia documenting the rise and development of Negro music as a quiet and effective piece of propaganda. And notably, in the most famous passage from one of his most famous essays, Criteria of Negro Art, which you'll also read in Hume 110, Du Bois proclaimed rather defiantly, "All art is propaganda, and ever must be, despite the wailing of the purists. I stand in utter shamelessness and say that whatever art I have for writing has been used always for propaganda for gaining the right of black people to love and enjoy. I do not care a damn for any art that is not used for propaganda. But I do care when propaganda is confined to one side while the other is stripped and silent." You could devote an entire semester-long music history course to unpacking the implications of these 4 sentences alone, which suggest music's propagandistic potential. Taken at face value, Du Bois's demand for artist propaganda, for art that purposefully seeks to persuade others, may remind us of music of all sorts, particularly with what we sometimes refer to as protest music. 19th century women's suffrage songs, the anti-lynching song Strange Fruit, popularized by Billie Holiday, Woody Guthrie's populist ode This Land Is Your Land, the caustic camp of Nina Simone's Mississippi Goddamn, Plastic Ono Band's pacifist mantra Give Peace a Chance, Carl Bean's disco-era pride anthem, I Was Born This Way, and Janelle Monáe and Wonderland's incantational Black Lives Matter track, Hell You Talking About, only scratched the surface. Leo Greenwood's 80s country hit God Bless the USA and Childish Gambino's music video This Is America propagandize for very different things. James Brown's Say It Loud, I'm Black and I'm Proud is message music that conveniently comes with an instruction manual. And obviously, music as a vehicle of persuasion is not just a phenomenon of 20th century popular music. The Lutheran cantata, including some by Johann Sebastian Bach, often threw shade at the popes and the Ottoman Turks to consolidate German Protestant identity. And for that matter, the very practice of setting religious words to music, in say a Roman Catholic Mass or a gospel song, is predicated on what St. Augustine at the end of the 4th century described as a belief that we're more fervently raised unto a flame of devotion when holy words are sung than when not. But in some ways, this is low-hanging fruit, however strange. Setting aside any specific content and without any intention whatsoever to defend or recuperate the concept, I want to take a moment to think about what Du Bois's characterization of his own work as propaganda might invite us to consider at a more fundamental level. There's actually a lively academic field called propaganda studies that hopes to call our attention to a potentially more dialogic and civic-minded dynamic of persuasive communication. Just last year, the Anglo-Ghanaian philosopher Kwame Anthony Appiah closed the New York Times op-ed by writing, "Democracy falters not when we disagree about things, but when we lose interest in trying to make sense of the other person's point of view and in trying to persuade that person of the merits of our own." In this context, we might envision persuasion as a much more inclusive circuit of intellectual call and response that involve acquiring requisite knowledge and depth of understanding, critically reflecting on what you're learning, formulating supported claims, considering your audience, and articulating what you think, for now at least, elegantly, cogently, and persuasively to others for their consideration. Ideally, the process is iterative, tending toward open-endedness and not foreclosure. To maximize persuasiveness, you may have to prepare yourself for counter-arguments, or complicating additional facts, or even deaf ears. Go back to the drawing board to reconsider and try again, a process my creative colleagues in the Division of the Arts call revision. It's not a matter of performative sparring with the end goal of winning an argument, or even impassioned insistence. Building a capacity to persuade others while maintaining the possibility of having our own mind changed with its outward-facing orientation, its premise that others have different views and disciplinary perspectives, and its propagation of solid cases for and against alternatives strikes me as being very close to the heart of liberal arts education. There are, of course, less noble modes of persuasion: deception, bribery, abuse of power, blackmail, violence. In his Socratic dialogue Gorgias, which scrutinizes the aims and ethics of the persuasive communication known as rhetoric, Plato distinguishes between persuasion that cements conviction, regardless of whether it's true or false, and persuasion that leads to greater understanding. So, just to be clear, successfully steering others toward unshakable convictions about, say, stolen elections, for instance, or even stubborn agnosticism is not the kind of persuasion I'm talking about. I'm thinking more along the lines of another 20th century African-American activist and thinker, Martin Luther King Jr., who followed in Du Bois's footsteps in advocating for propaganda. In a 1954 sermon, King said, quote, "There is a noble sense in which propaganda can be used. Propaganda is simply an attempt to disseminate principles or ideas by organized effort," end quote. You've perhaps encountered King as having also said the arc of the moral universe is long, but it bends toward justice. But with all due respect to Dr. King, I have to confess that I've become a bit more skeptical of this aphorism, as reassuring and sustaining as the thought may be. I think I'm more inclined to believe that such an arc, if there is one, bends or becomes crooked because of the ideas we choose to propagate and become persuaded by. So, without getting distracted by propaganda's connotative baggage, we might think of Du Bois's self-identification as a master of propaganda as his expression of the urgency of becoming an informed, ethical, and persuasive communicator. Persuasion won't and shouldn't be the only kind of communicating that you undertake in the next 4 years. Formulating good questions is frankly a much more precious skill. And it's understandable to think of the world of propaganda as represented by commercial advertising, Washington lobbyists, PR firms, and yellow journalism. But as you embark upon your college careers and lives as adults, you might also remain open to imagining a different ecosystem of persuasive communication, one in which, rather than being confined to one side that Du Bois described as stripped and silent, you make conscious choices about how and whether to propagate your ideas and about what kinds of things you want to make a case for. In my reading, Du Bois, reeling from a gruesome act of anti-Black violence, came to believe that propaganda, neither good, inherently good, nor evil, but necessary, is founded upon the simple idea that change and preservation are both possible, and that our own persuasive communication of ideas and alternatives can be a part of making either happen. Thought of as persuasion, propaganda, which we habitually presume to harbor cynicism, can potentially be an affirmation of hope, a commitment to acts of intellectual generosity and necessary risk that arise from believing in others as much as you believe in your own ideas. To riff on Toni Morrison, who encouraged young writers to write the book they wish they could read, I encourage you to be the ears that you want to be heard with. As he explained in Criteria of Negro Art, Du Bois was drawn to music and the arts in part because he believed that beauty was a manifestation of truth. But that's just one way of conceptualizing truth. What does it mean for something to be true? Is truth something we learn or something we intuit? Is it deduced logically, or is it something we continually negotiate with others? Does it persistently reflect human experience, or does it hover on its margins, waiting to be claimed from lost and found? Class of 2026, you're beginning your college education at a time when these questions are as pressing as they have been at any moment in my lifetime, which, to tell the truth, is slightly unnerving for me and probably for many of your professors. But the moment may also present a motivating opportunity for you as lifelong thinkers, citizens of the world, and, hopefully, persuasive communicators of the things you will come to understand and hold as true. In propagating your ideas during your college journey, I hope that you'll be led by the clarity of your thinking, the courage of your convictions, the quality and charisma of your speaking and writing, and the compassion with which you engage others. And even if you never aspire to words that are just propaganda, I do hope your Reed education will inspire you to make sure that the aspirations of your propaganda will always be just. Thanks for listening, and welcome to Reed.